A dust-laden wind whipped across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory as Beatrice Dawson clutched her father's pocket watch. The only remnant of the life she'd left behind in Boston, a life now as distant as the horizon stretching endlessly before her. The year was 1878, and the westbound Wagon train had been Beatrice's salvation and her undoing. 3 weeks into their journey toward a new life in Oregon, the attack had come swift and merciless. Not Indians, as many feared, but outlaws, desperate men with hollow eyes and quick triggers who descended upon the train like locusts. Beatrice had been gathering firewood when the first shots rang out. By the time she'd returned, chaos had engulfed the camp. Bodies lay strewn about like discarded dolls, supplies scattered to the winds. Through the mayhem, she spotted their wagon, her aunt's prized possession, being ransacked by a man with a face like weathered leather. "Stop," she'd cried, rushing forward without thought. The outlaw had turned, his eyes cold as winter frost. The last thing Beatrice remembered was the butt of his pistol coming down hard across her temple before darkness claimed her. When consciousness flickered back, she found herself pinned beneath the overturned wagon, its weight crushing against her lower body. The attackers had apparently pushed it over during their hasty departure, not knowing or perhaps not caring that she lay beneath it. Blood trickled from the wound on her head and a searing pain shot through her left leg. Night was falling, the temperature would drop soon, and she was alone. "Help," Beatrice called, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone, please help." But the only answer was the howl of distant wolves. Hours passed like centuries. Beatrice drifted in and out of consciousness, her throat parched, her body numb from cold and pain. Morning came, bringing blistering heat instead of relief. She knew death was circling, patient and inevitable. It was the sound of a horse's hooves that finally penetrated her delirium, slow, steady, approaching with caution. Beatrice tried to call out, but her voice had abandoned her. The hoofbeats stopped, silence, then the crunch of boots on hard, packed earth. "Hello, anybody alive out here?" The voice was deep, cautious. Beatrice mustered what little strength remained and tapped her fingers against the wooden wagon frame. A weak signal, but it was all she could manage. The footsteps quickened, circled the wagon, and suddenly a face appeared in her limited field of vision. A man with sun-bronzed skin, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a week's worth of stubble covering a strong jaw. His expression shifted from wariness to shock. "Good Lord," he breathed. "Hold on, miss, just hold on." The man disappeared from view. Beatrice heard him assessing the wagon, muttering to himself. "Too heavy to push, need leverage, damn it all." He reappeared, kneeling beside the small opening where she could see out. "My name's Preston Foster, miss. I'm going to get you out, but I need you to stay with me. Can you do that?" Beatrice managed the faintest nod. "Good. This wagon's pinning you down something fierce, but I think I can lift it enough for you to slide out. It's going to hurt, and I need you ready when I say move. Understand?" Another weak nod. Preston disappeared again. Beatrice heard him removing his coat, saw his shadow as he positioned himself at the edge of the wagon. "On 3, he called. 1, 2, 3, the wagon shifted, lifted perhaps 6 inches off the ground. Beatrice could hear Preston's labored grunts, see the strain in his face as veins bulged in his neck and forearms. "Move," he gasped. "I can't hold it long." Summoning strength she didn't know she possessed, Beatrice dragged herself forward, inch by excruciating inch, feeling the wagon trembling above her as Preston's strength began to falter. Just as her feet cleared the edge, the wagon crashed down with a deafening thud. Preston was at her side immediately, his breathing ragged. "You're out. Thank God you're out." Beatrice tried to speak, but darkness claimed her once more. When she woke, it was to the gentle sway of a horse and the secure feeling of arms around her. She was sitting sideways across a saddle, her back supported against a broad chest, her head resting against a shoulder. The steady rhythm of a heartbeat thrummed in her ear. "Welcome back," Preston said quietly. "Was starting to worry you weren't going to rejoin the land of the living." Beatrice licked her cracked lips. "Water," she managed to croak. Preston halted his horse and reached for a canteen, bringing it carefully to her lips. The water tasted like heaven itself. "Small sips," he cautioned. Too much too fast will make you sick. After she'd taken her fill, Preston continued their journey. Got a cabin about an hour's ride from here, not much, but it's shelter. Need to tend to that leg of yours. The others? Beatrice asked, her voice slightly stronger. A shadow crossed Preston's face. I buried those I found. 8 souls. Wasn't anyone else alive when I got there? Tears burned in Beatrice's eyes. Her aunt and uncle the only family she had left after her father's passing gone. Every person she'd come to know during their journey gone. Everything but the clothes on her back and her father's watch gone. I'm sorry, Preston said softly. Was it Indians? Beatrice shook her head weakly. Outlaws, they came out of nowhere. Preston's jaw tightened. Harmon's gang, most likely. They've been terrorizing wagon trains coming through this territory for months. Army can't catch 'em, sheriff won't try. True to his word, Preston's cabin appeared on the horizon about an hour later, a modest structure nestled against a stand of pines, with a small corral off to one side where 2 other horses grazed. Smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. Home, sweet home, he murmured, easing them both down from the horse. Preston carried Beatrice inside and set her gently on a narrow bed in the corner of the one-room cabin. The interior was spare but tidy, a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, shelves stocked with supplies, and a single window that looked out onto the plains. A rifle hung above the door. Been living here about 2 years now, Preston explained as he stoked the fire. Not much, but it suits me and the horses. He brought her water, then set about examining her injuries. The gash on her temple had stopped bleeding but would need cleaning. It was her leg that concerned him, most swollen and discolored just above the ankle. Might be broken, he said with a frown. Nearest doctor's in Wildwood, 3 days' ride from here, but I've set a bone or 2 in my time. May hurt worse than the breaking did. Beatrice nodded, steeling herself. Do what you must, Mr. Foster. Preston, he corrected, offering a flask. Whiskey. Not exactly medicine, but it'll help with what's coming. The next hour was a blur of agony as Preston confirmed the break, then set and splinted her leg with practiced hands. Through it all, he spoke in low, soothing tones, telling her about his horses, the cabin, the weather, anything to distract her from the pain. By the time he finished, Beatrice was drenched in sweat but conscious. You're tougher than you look, Boston, he said with grudging admiration, using the nickname he'd bestowed after learning where she hailed from. Necessity, she replied through gritted teeth. When will I be able to travel? Preston's brow furrowed. Travel where? To Oregon. That's where we were headed. My uncle had arrangements for land. Boston, Preston interrupted gently. You're not going anywhere for at least 6 weeks. That leg needs time to heal, and even then, your family's gone. The land arrangements likely died with your uncle. You'd be heading into the wilderness alone. Reality crashed down on Beatrice with crushing force. She was stranded in the middle of nowhere, injured with no family, no money, and no prospects. The sob that tore from her throat surprised even her. Preston looked alarmed. Now I didn't mean to, but the floodgates had opened. Weeks of tension, fear, and loss poured out of Beatrice in heaving sobs that racked her slender frame. Preston hovered awkwardly for a moment, then sat beside her on the bed, his large hand patting her shoulder with surprising gentleness. Let it out, he said quietly. Sometimes that's all a person can do. When her tears finally subsided, exhaustion claimed her. Preston covered her with a rough woolen blanket and moved to his chair by the fire, giving her privacy in the only way the small cabin allowed. The next few days established a rhythm. Preston tended to Beatrice's injuries, prepared simple meals, and saw to his horses and small garden. He wasn't much for conversation, but when he did speak, his words were thoughtful and often unexpectedly kind. On the 4th day, as he changed the bandage on her head, Beatrice finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. Why did you help me, Mr. Foster Preston? You could have ridden past. His hands stilled momentarily before continuing their work. Same reason anyone would, I expect. Not everyone would have stopped. Fewer still would have lifted a wagon with their bare hands. A flush colored his tan cheeks. Adrenaline does strange things to a man. It was more than that, Beatrice pressed. Most men would have presumed me dead and kept riding. Preston sighed, sitting back on his heels. 5 years ago, I was riding with a cattle drive when a flash flood hit. My best friend got pinned under debris. Nobody would help me try to free him, said he was already gone. I didn't listen. His eyes clouded with memory. Turned out they were right. He was gone before I even got to him, but I've never forgotten that moment of thinking, what if he wasn't? What if someone could be saved, but no one bothers to check? Beatrice reached out, her fingers brushing his calloused hand. Thank you for checking on me. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a connection, a shared understanding of loss and survival. Preston cleared his throat and stood abruptly. Need to check on the horses, he muttered, and was gone. As the days turned to weeks, Beatrice's strength returned gradually. Her leg remained splinted, but the swelling had subsided and the pain had dulled to a manageable ache. Unable to bear feeling useless, she insisted on contributing to their small household in whatever ways she could, mending Preston's shirts, preparing meals while seated at the table, even keeping his ledger in her neat handwriting. They spoke more freely now. Preston told her of his life, born in Missouri, fought for the Union during the war despite his young age, then drifted west afterward, unable to settle back into normal life. He'd cowboyed for various outfits before deciding to stake his own small claim here, breeding and training horses for sale. Not getting rich, he admitted, but it's honest work, and I answer to no man but myself. Beatrice shared her own story, her father's business failures and early death, her mother's passing years before, and how she'd come to live with her aunt and uncle in their small Boston apartment. When they'd proposed the journey west to start anew on Oregon land, she'd had little choice but to accompany them. I was to be a school teacher, she confessed one evening as they sat before the fire. That was the plan, the town needed one, and I have some education, Preston nodded thoughtfully. You'd make a fine teacher, smart as you are. And now, Beatrice asked quietly. What becomes of me now? The question hung in the air between them. Preston stared into the flames. When you're healed enough to travel, I'll take you to Wildwood. It's a decent-sized town. They might need a teacher. If not, there's always work for women who can read and write. I see, Beatrice said, trying to mask her disappointment. She'd known this arrangement was temporary, of course, but the prospect of leaving filled her with unexpected sadness. Preston seemed to sense her mood. Course, there's no rush, he added quickly. Winter's coming, mountain passes get treacherous, might be better to wait till spring. The relief Beatrice felt was immediate and profound. As autumn painted the surrounding hills in russet and gold, Beatrice began taking tentative steps around the cabin, leaning heavily on a crutch Preston had fashioned for her. Her progress was slow but steady, and Preston watched her efforts with quiet approval. You're healing well, he observed one afternoon as she made her way carefully to the door. Be running circles around me by Christmas, Beatrice laughed. I doubt that, but I might be able to fetch my own water soon, which would be a welcome change for both of us. Preston's expression softened. I don't mind fetching for you, Boston. The tenderness in his voice caught her off guard. Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, something unspoken passed between them. Then Preston abruptly turned away, mumbling about checking the horses. These moments had become more frequent instances when a look would linger, when hands would brush in passing, when words seemed to carry meanings beyond their simple definitions. Beatrice found herself watching Preston as he worked, the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the gentleness of his hands with the horses, the rare but transformative quality of his smile. It was becoming increasingly difficult to imagine leaving when spring arrived. The first snow came earlier than expected, blanketing the world outside in white silence. Preston spent the day securing the corral, bringing in extra firewood and checking his supplies. That evening, as wind howled around the cabin's sturdy walls, they sat closer than usual before the fire. Might be in for a hard winter, Preston remarked, his deep voice barely audible above the crackling flames. Beatrice nodded, her hands busy with the shirt she was mending. Will your provisions last? Got enough for me. Might need to be careful with 2 mouths to feed, but we'll manage. He glanced at her, a hint of worry in his eyes. I'm sorry it's not more comfortable for you here. A proper lady like yourself deserves better. Don't, Beatrice said firmly, setting aside her sewing. Don't apologize for saving my life, for sharing your home, for treating me with more kindness than most proper gentlemen I've known would have shown. Preston looked startled by her vehemence. I know what you meant, but I've had quite enough of proper society to last a lifetime. There's more humanity in this cabin than in all the drawing rooms of Boston. A slow smile spread across Preston's face. Is that so, Boston? It is, she affirmed, returning to her sewing to hide the blush rising in her cheeks. As winter deepened, the isolation of the cabin intensified. Days passed when venturing outside was impossible due to blizzard conditions. These hours of forced confinement could have been unbearable, but instead, they fostered a deepening connection between Beatrice and Preston. They played cards by lamplight, Preston teaching her poker while she schooled him in whist. They read aloud from the few books he possessed, mostly practical manuals, but also a dog-eared volume of Shakespeare's sonnets that had belonged to his mother. Preston revealed an unexpected gift for recitation, his voice giving new dimension to the familiar words. Most evenings, they simply talked. Beatrice learned that beneath Preston's taciturn exterior lay a thoughtful, intelligent mind with strong opinions on everything from politics to horse breeding. Preston discovered that Beatrice possessed not only book learning, but a sharp wit and practical wisdom that continually surprised him. One night, as a particularly fierce storm raged outside, Preston finally asked the question that had clearly been troubling him. Do you miss it? The city, I mean. All those things civilized folk take for granted. Beatrice considered her answer carefully. I miss certain comforts, yes, hot baths. Libraries, music, she smiled. But I've found there are compensations to this life as well. Such as, Preston prompted, his expression unreadable in the firelight, space to breathe. Stars that fill the entire sky instead of being hidden by buildings and smoke. Silence that isn't just the absence of noise, but a presence all its own. She hesitated, then added softly, and company that values honesty over pretense. Preston stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his storm-colored eyes. You're a remarkable woman, Beatrice Dawson. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver through her. As you are a remarkable man, Preston Foster. The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Preston leaned forward slightly, his gaze dropping to her lips. Beatrice held her breath. A sudden crash outside shattered the moment, a branch breaking under the weight of snow. Preston jerked back, rising to his feet. Should check that the roof's holding, he muttered, moving to grab his coat. Beatrice watched him go, her heart racing with the knowledge of what had almost happened, and the certainty that it was only a matter of time before it did. Christmas arrived with a break in the weather, clear skies and sunshine that transformed the snowscape into a dazzling white kingdom. Preston insisted on helping Beatrice outside, supporting her as she took her first steps beyond the cabin door in weeks. It's beautiful, she breathed, squinting against the brightness. Worth getting cabin fever for, Preston agreed, his arm steady around her waist. They stood together, savoring the crisp air and momentary freedom. When Beatrice began to shiver, Preston guided her back inside where a special meal awaited: venison he'd managed to hunt during the weather break, potatoes from his stored supply, and even a small jar of preserved peaches he'd been saving for a special occasion. Merry Christmas, Boston, he said, presenting her with a small package wrapped in brown paper. Preston, you shouldn't have. I have nothing to give you. You've given plenty, he insisted. Go on, open it. Inside was a delicate wooden carving of a horse, small enough to fit in her palm, polished to a soft sheen. The detail was remarkable, every line of muscle, the flow of the mane, even the alert expression in the eyes. You made this? Beatrice asked, astonished. Preston nodded, looking uncharacteristically self-conscious. Been working on it when you sleep. It's not much, but it's perfect, she interrupted, cradling the carving as if it were made of gold. No one has ever given me something they made with their own hands. Thank you. Impulsively, she leaned forward and kissed his cheek. Preston froze, his eyes widening in surprise. For a terrifying moment, Beatrice feared she'd overstepped, but then his expression softened. "You're welcome," he said gruffly, touching the spot where her lips had been. The remainder of the day passed in a warm glow of companionship, neither of them mentioning the kiss, though it seemed to hover between them like a promise. As January yielded to February, Beatrice's leg healed enough that she could walk without the crutch, though she still favored it with a slight limp that Preston assured her would fade with time. Their daily routine shifted as she took on more responsibilities, insisting that she earn her keep properly. One afternoon, as Preston returned from checking his trap lines, he found Beatrice outside the cabin, attempting to chop wood. Her form was awkward, her strikes inefficient, but her determination was unmistakable. "What in tarnation do you think you're doing?" he demanded, striding toward her. Beatrice turned, wiping sweat from her brow despite the chill air. "Contributing, you do too much already." "You'll re-injure yourself," Preston protested, reaching for the axe. Beatrice stepped back, clutching the tool. "I'm perfectly capable, I never said you weren't capable, but that leg hasn't healed properly yet, and swinging an axe puts strain on. Stop treating me like I'm made of glass." Beatrice's voice rose, months of frustration suddenly finding voice. "I'm not some delicate flower that will wilt at the first challenge. I survived being crushed beneath a wagon, Preston Foster. I think I can manage to chop a few logs." Preston's jaw worked as he struggled to contain his own temper. "Fine, go ahead and undo all the healing you've done. See if I care." He stormed off toward the corral, leaving Beatrice standing there, axe in hand, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. By the time Preston returned to the cabin at dusk, his anger had cooled to regret. He found Beatrice seated at the table, a modest pile of split wood stacked neatly by the door. Her face was tight with pain she was clearly trying to hide. Preston sighed heavily. "I'm sorry," he said, the words coming easier than he'd expected. "You were right, you're not made of glass, I worry about you." Beatrice nodded, her own expression softening. "And I'm sorry for snapping at you, I know you mean well, but Preston, I can't be helpless." "I won't be a burden to you." "A burden?" Preston looked genuinely bewildered. "Is that what you think you are? What else would I be? You saved my life, sheltered me, fed me. You think I'd do all that for someone I considered a burden?" Preston interrupted, crossing to kneel before her chair. "Boston Beatrice, don't you understand? These past months with you here, they've been the best of my life." Beatrice stared at him, her heart suddenly hammering in her chest. "What are you saying?" Preston took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I'm saying that the thought of you leaving come spring, it tears me apart. I'm saying that this cabin wasn't a home until you were in it. I'm saying," he swallowed hard, "I'm saying I love you, Beatrice Dawson." Time seemed to stop as his words hung in the air between them. Then, with a small cry, Beatrice leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then grew in confidence as Preston responded, his hands moving to cradle her face with infinite tenderness. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I love you too," Beatrice whispered. "I think I have since you lifted that wagon off me." Preston laughed softly. "That's a mighty low bar for winning your heart." "On the contrary," she replied, tracing his jawline with her fingertips. "It showed me exactly who you are, a man willing to risk everything to save a stranger. How could I not love such a man?" Their second kiss held all the promise of the future. They now both envisioned a future together. As March brought the first hints of spring, Preston rode into Wildwood for supplies and to speak with the town's preacher. He returned with not only provisions, but also news that made Beatrice's heart soar. The schoolteacher position remained unfilled, and the town council was eager to meet her. "They need someone educated," Preston explained as they sat before the fire that evening. "The children have been without proper schooling for nearly a year. The pay isn't much, but it would be enough," Beatrice assured him. "But Preston, Wildwood is 3 days' ride from here." "Your horses, your land, already thought of that," he replied, taking her hand. "There's land available closer to town, not as much as I have here, but enough, and Wildwood's growing. They need good horses. Could be a better market than I have now." Beatrice studied his face. "You'd give up this place for me, for us," he corrected gently. "Besides, this was never meant to be permanent, just a place to catch my breath after years of drifting. But now," he squeezed her hand, "now I'm ready to build something lasting with you if you'll have me." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Preston Foster?" In answer, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Beatrice Dawson, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, her vision blurring. 1,000 times yes. They were married in Wildwood on the first day of April, with wildflowers in Beatrice's hair and a new suit on Preston's broad shoulders. The town turned out in force, curious about the new schoolteacher and her husband, the horse breeder who'd be settling nearby. Their new cabin, though modest, sat on a rise overlooking a stream, with good grazing land for Preston's horses and a separate room that would serve as Beatrice's classroom, until the town completed the schoolhouse they'd promised to build. On their wedding night, as they stood together on their porch watching the stars emerge above the rolling hills, Preston wrapped his arms around his bride. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Beatrice turned in his embrace, lifting her face to his. "More than I ever thought possible. When I was trapped beneath that wagon, I was certain my life was ending. Instead, it was just beginning." Preston's kiss was as tender as it was passionate, a promise of all the days and nights to come. "I thank God every day that I found you," he murmured against her lips. "And I thank God every day that you were strong enough to lift that wagon," she replied with a smile. As they stepped into their home together, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that the path that had led her west, despite its hardships and losses, had ultimately delivered her exactly where she was meant to be, in the arms of the man who had lifted more than a wagon with his bare hands. He had lifted her spirits, her hopes, and ultimately, her heart. And in this wild, beautiful land that had once seemed so alien, Beatrice Dawson Foster had finally found her true home.